Once I had to wear a wig, you know.
Did you?
Yeah.
Why?
And I went in hospital.
Was it a straight one or a curly one?
Curly one.
What colour was it?
It was auburn, similar colour.
Maureen Long survived the Yorkshire Ripper. The killer hit her with a hammer and slashed her with a knife.
All I know is that I've got a plate in my head and a bit of some of my skull missing and stab wounds at front of my stomach and stabbed in the back.
Mrs. Long was left for dead in 1977. The Yorkshire Ripper haunted the streets of the north of England for another 5 years. By the end, Peter Sutcliffe had murdered 13 women.
On the nights when one wakes up sweating about cases from the past, it's the Sutcliffe era which even now, in my 60s, I remember most clearly in the whole of my career as a forensic pathologist.
It was the biggest manhunt in British criminal history. 20 years on, detectives involved break their long silence to reveal how it ended for the police in humiliation and disgrace.
Even to this day, you're always thinking of what might have been, what you might have done, where you could have gone. Could you have done things any different?
I'll live with that for the rest of my life. I'll live with being a party to the wrong decision.
All along, the identity of the killer lay hidden in police files. Interviewed 9 times, lost in the system. Peter Sutcliffe, free to kill again. October 1975. The Prince Philip playing fields in Leeds. The first victim of the Yorkshire Ripper died within sight of the home she shared with her 4 young children. Her name was Wilma McCann. She was 28 years old and came from Scotland. She'd been hit over the head, her blouse pulled up, her trousers pulled down, and stabbed 14 times. January 1976, 3 months later. Another Leeds woman got into a car with a man who said he wanted to pay her for sex. He drove her to an industrial wasteland, now buried beneath the inner city motorway. Her name was Emily Jackson. She was a married woman of 42 and a mother of 3 children. This time, the killer left a single clue, a boot print on Mrs. Jackson's leg. As West Yorkshire police launched a second murder hunt, newspapers were already calling the killer Jack the Ripper. The post-mortem revealed Emily Jackson had been hit with a hammer and stabbed 51 times with a Phillips screwdriver. Michael Green has just retired as Professor of Forensic Pathology at Sheffield University. As deputy to the Home Office pathologist David G., he was involved in the hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper from the outset and helped identify the weapons the killer used.
Well, these are all of them ordinary tools that one will find around the house, but on examination of the injuries at first, no clear pattern emerged. Subsequently, of course, it became obvious that a pattern was emerging of 2 or 3 heavy blows, usually to the back of the head, curved laceration through the skin, round depressed fracture underneath it, would produce quite severe brain damage, immediate unconsciousness, and death will occur fairly shortly afterwards. And so the hammer rapidly became a trademark.
The dead women were both prostitutes. As their confidential telex made clear, West Yorkshire police made the obvious deduction. Motive appears to be hatred of prostitutes. It meant they discounted assaults on women who were not prostitutes. Women who had already given photo-fit descriptions of a bearded attacker. Wakefield, 1972. Bradford, 1975. Keighley, 1975. And then Leeds, 1976. A photo fit from Marcella Claxton. 4 months after the second murder, Marcella Claxton came out of a party in Leeds and got into a car with a stranger. She thought he was taking her home. Instead, he brought her here to Roundhay Park and attacked her with a hammer.
And he hit me on my head. Then I found myself on the grass, knocked out. And then when I come round, that's when I walk all the way down there. Take my knickers out to wipe my head.
What was happening on your head?
Clods were coming out of my head, big piece of clods. My head was bleeding. And I was 4 months pregnant as well.
What happened to the baby?
I lost that.
In pitch darkness, Marcella Claxton staggered half a mile to the road, clutching her knickers to her head to staunch the blood. She reached the phone box. She called an ambulance. But the police never included Marcella Claxton in the Ripper case. They discounted her photo fit because she wasn't a prostitute and hadn't been attacked with a knife. But 9 months later, her bearded attacker went back to Roundhay Park with another woman in his car. This time, he took her behind the sports pavilion. This time, he left clearly identifiable tire marks. And this time, he killed her. Her name was Irene Richardson. She was 28, recently separated from her husband and 3 children. She'd been hit on the head 3 times with a hammer, stabbed brutally in the stomach, neck, and throat. Police uncovered a macabre new twist. The killer had arranged his victim's body, unzipped her knee-length boots and laid them carefully, neatly, over the back of her thighs.
These were not frenzied attacks. This was the sort of man who thought about what he had done, planned his attack carefully, and then was concerned to arrange everything about the body to have the maximum shock impact upon whoever came upon the scene first and those who came afterwards.
Police in Leeds were now dealing with a serial killer who had murdered 3 women. The city was full of policemen asking questions. The killer kept 1 step ahead and moved on, 8 miles, to Bradford.
I'll tell you something. Bigger than one bloody going downstairs.
The Carlisle pub stands in one of the roughest areas of inner city Bradford. The Yorkshire Ripper's 4th victim went drinking here on the night of her death. She got into her killer's car outside the pub. She took him home to her flat. As she walked through the door, he attacked her with a hammer. Police found her body face down on the bed. Her name was Patricia Atkinson. She was 32. Her killer left a boot print on a blood-stained sheet. Forensic examination showed it was a size 7 Wellington, like the one which left an imprint on Emily Jackson's thigh. Otherwise, he left no clues. The identity of the killer of 4 prostitutes in 18 months remained a mystery. Then the 5th body was found. She died in the children's playground at Reginald Street in Leeds. She was not a prostitute. She was a shop assistant, and she was only 16. A new high-ranking police team stepped in to take overall control of Britain's biggest murder inquiry. For Detective Superintendent Dick Holland, 4 years at the top of the Ripper hunt began here, on Sunday, the 27th of June, 1977, when 2 young children found the body lying face down in a corner of the playground.
The girl was laid there. She'd been attacked and obviously mistaken for a prostitute. She was a young, pretty girl, and obviously it's not a very pleasant sight, and no matter how accustomed to such things you become as a senior investigating officer, it's not pleasant, and it does tell on you every time.
Her name was Jane MacDonald. She'd been on her way home from a Saturday night out. All the separate murder hunts now came together into one incident room under Assistant Chief Constable George Oldfield, West Yorkshire's top detective. 5 women were dead, but for the general public in Leeds, it was the death of 16-year-old Jane MacDonald which hit the hardest.
What sort of a girl was she?
Beautiful, well-mannered, cheerful, always a smile for you.
And not like any of the others. She wasn't a bit like any others. She wasn't in their category at all.
It's just shocking for a young lass like that. She was beautiful.
Before Jane MacDonald, ordinary people in Leeds took false comfort from the Ripper's apparent obsession with prostitutes. The teenager's death cast a chill over every family in West Yorkshire. Any woman out on her own feared she might be the next.
50252. 8989. 5 by itself for the 5.
Random serial killings are the hardest of all murders to solve.
10616. Both the 4s, 44.
Because nothing but bad luck links each victim to her killer. But within only 2 weeks of Jane MacDonald's death, the police got a lucky break.
10313.
A survivor.
7070. 20525.
Maureen Long was then 42. She was a keen dancer.
I used to love dancing. I used to go to Mecca at weekend and do a lot of dancing, and well, I used to have a drink and enjoy myself and everything, and go around with friends, women friends. I was well known in town.
Mrs. Long came out of the Mecca ballroom one summer's night in 1977 and accepted a lift from a stranger.
All I remember was trying to pick myself up, grabbing hold of grass to try and get up, and I kept falling, and I wondered what was wrong with me, and I kept falling back, and as I was trying to pull myself up, I fell again. And then I was screaming, and I heard this dog barking, and I heard someone say, "Oh, you're all right." And that's all I remember that night. When you get hit over the head, at back of the head, you can't remember things.
Police faced a classic Ripper attack. He didn't rape her or rob her. He hit her over the head with a hammer and stabbed her repeatedly in the body.
Can you remember waking up?
Intensive care unit, in a cot, like a cot, and I wondered what I was doing there, and I had all my hair shaved off.
Did you know what had happened to you?
Maureen Long never did remember anything about her attacker, and the police had no forensic evidence. When scientists examined the victim's clothes, they found nothing. It was the same in every attack. The Ripper left no hair, no blood, no semen, no trace. All the police had to go on were the perfect tyre prints found in the park where Irene Richardson died. Officers had established a list of 50,000 possible cars and spent 9 months trying to track them all down. A huge task, 3/4 completed when senior officers made a disastrous decision to abandon it.
It was decided that we hadn't the manpower to run 2 murder inquiries and a tyre inquiry with a diminishing return from the tyre inquiry. That was an unfortunate decision because the Ripper's car was in fact on the remaining uncompleted list.
Driving the same car, fitted with the same tyres, the Yorkshire Ripper left his usual hunting ground and ventured further afield. For the first time, he left West Yorkshire and crossed the Pennines. In Manchester, he made his first mistake. He picked up a woman in Moss Side who took him to the allotments near the Southern Cemetery. There he gave her £5 for sex, and there he killed her. Her name was Jean Jordan, 21 years old, mother of 2 children. She lay undiscovered for 10 days. During that time, her killer went back to the body. He slashed her again. He tried to cut off her head with a hacksaw. But he never found what he was looking for, her handbag with the brand new £5 note he'd given her out of his wage packet. That £5 note would lead the police directly to the Yorkshire Ripper, yet he remained free to kill another 7 women. Manchester police traced the brand new £5 note recovered when a passerby found Jean Jordan's handbag. The note had been delivered in a bullion van to the Midland Bank branch in Shipley, near Bradford.
Well, the police turned up one day, the detectives, wanting us to help them trace this £5 note, which apparently they thought had come from Shipley branch, connected with the Ripper.
Hi, good afternoon.
Well, it was quite a big task, really, because obviously we give quite a lot of money out, and trying to trace that one £5 note out of all the thousands of £5 notes that had gone out was quite a big thing to do, really. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50.
It was exciting, I suppose, is the only word to use. I was taken out of my working environment. I was picked up by a police car every morning, brought back home by a police car. I never went back to work at Shipley branch again. I worked in a police station with police for nearly 3 weeks, doing the cash analysis. It was new. It was novel. Thank you very much.
The two clerks already knew the £5 note had come in a payroll consignment of £25,000 straight from the Bank of England. Now, they had to work out who got it in his pay packet. It took them only 2 weeks to narrow it down to 34 local firms, employing a total of 8,000 people. Among them, a lorry driver called Peter Sutcliffe, a married man who just bought his first house. Within weeks of the death of Jean Jordan, he was visited twice by Manchester detectives asking about the £5 note. His wife and his mother both gave him an alibi. They said the family had all been together at their housewarming party. Into the manhunt, and bank clerk Maureen Banham went home from work every night in fear.
If you were on your own, you were always very wary, watching if there was anybody about, or, you know, any men about particularly.
Six women had died. Every woman in the north of England felt the threat.
Getting home from work was a nightmare because you were always frightened there was somebody about watching you. You didn't know who was there, and you knew this man was somewhere about or could be, and everybody was frightened at the time, and you were always glad when you got home safe.
On a cold December night in 1977, 25-year-old Marilyn Moore got into the Ripper's car. Marilyn Moore survived the attempted murder on rough industrial ground in Leeds. Her evidence should have offered vital new clues to Detective Superintendent Dick Holland and his team, especially about the car the killer was driving.
They got out of the car, presumably to get into the back seat, when he struck her blows on the head with a hammer. As she slumped at the side of the car, another vehicle with a coupler came in and obviously disturbed his activities. So he jumped back in the car and sped off, turning to go towards the road and the exit across there. As a result, he left curved tyre marks, rather like the ones you see on the ground behind me.
3 of the tyre marks were identical to those found near the bodies of Irene Richardson and Jean Jordan. Police sat Marilyn Moore in all 22 possible models of car. She picked out the Morris Oxford. She was wrong. It was a Ford Corsair. She did make a photo fit which was, with hindsight, astonishingly accurate. But then she started accusing innocent men. Police decided she was unreliable.
Unfortunately, we followed the wrong line here. We ought to, in retrospect, to have followed the photo fit and not followed the car, because she got it wrong.
And so the lorry driver from Bradford remained free. Under the pressure of running 6 difficult murder investigations in 2 years, the police were making mistakes, abandoning the tyre inquiry, ignoring the photo fits. In January 1978, the Yorkshire Ripper drove his Ford Corsair to Huddersfield, to the railway arches behind Garrard's timber yard, where the town's prostitutes worked. Her name was Helen Ritker. She was 18 years old and had been reported missing by her twin sister. The two teenagers worked here as prostitutes together. The surviving sister, Rita, was pictured helping George Oldfield. The public learned how the twins grew up together in children's homes. Information poured in. Police followed up every single lead.
On the evening that she met her death, there was a brown van in the area. He followed Helen Ritker's sister and watched what they did, because his kink in life was following prostitutes with their clients and watching their act if it was outdoor. Now, if he'd chosen the other sister only 2 or 3 minutes earlier to follow, he would in fact have witnessed the murder. But unfortunately, he followed the wrong twin. Just bad luck.
Without modern computers, the deluge of information had to be catalogued and indexed by hand. A massive job, done by young policewomen like Sue Neve. 5 years of Sue Neve's working life is now held in the basement archive at West Yorkshire Police Headquarters.
Initially, we worked around what we called a wheel, and that was in the centre of the desk. 4 indexes could be sat at each corner, and we could spin it round and pick up the cards. But when the wheel became full, then we had to move to these wooden boxes, and they were filed in, well, still in the alphabetical order of surname in the boxes. One drawer here with, I don't know, there'll be upwards of 1,000 cards in, I'd say, and we've got 138 of these boxes, all indexed manually. An awful lot of work, but it was a manual system and it was the only one available at the time, and yes, everything seemed to work fine. It was just the quantity of the work that nearly swamped us, really.
7 dead now. There was a public appeal to help raise a £30,000 reward, and a television appeal directly to the murderer.
I want to appeal to you to come forward and give yourself up. I mean, we may be prostitutes, but we still have a life. I think you've taken enough lives already.
I want to talk to you this evening not as a psychiatrist, because I've never met you, and because probably a psychiatrist is the last kind of person you want to see. I do want to ask you to give yourself up.
You've no future while you're on the run, and in the end you will be caught. And the longer you wait, the worse it will be.
I want you to pick up the phone, not tomorrow, not next week, but now, and tell the police who you are.
Give yourself up, now.
But he had already killed again. Another victim lay undiscovered on wasteland in Bradford. A woman who died here 10 days before Helen Ritker. Her name was Yvonne Pearson. She had gone missing from her home in Bradford in January 1978. Her decomposed body turned up under a settee 2 months later on Easter Sunday.
Mrs. Pearson's death was the most violent of the series up to that point. The skull was stove in. Whatever had been used, it was not a hammer. There were no stab wounds of the chest, but on the other hand, there were bruising injuries to both the chest and trunk, which extended internally. Could have been somebody kneeling on the chest, could have been somebody stamping on the chest. But, as I say, these were serious injuries, not just serious head injuries, but the full weight of the assailant had been used in some way from the neck down as well.
You know, I would have thought the prostitutes would have been on the run. I would have thought they would have been leaving this area in dozens and dozens. And there's no real evidence to support that that is so. They are staying and they are still walking the streets, and unfortunately they aren't being very intelligent about it.
Trevor Lapish was the new head of Bradford CID.
The man that was involved in this series had to be a complete sadist. I mean, he was picking victims at random, didn't matter whether they were innocent girls, prostitutes, or whatever. But the things that he was doing were horrific injuries. You might think in your own mind he was a madman. But then, of course, you looked at the facts and looked what sort of evidence he was leaving behind, and he wasn't a bad man at all. He was a cool, calculating individual that was getting a great thrill in what he was doing, a sexual thrill. And the real thing that bugged you was that you were going no further forward with it.
While Yvonne Pearson's body still lay undetected, police headquarters had received an intriguing letter with a Sunderland postmark. Writing personally to George Oldfield, the letter said, "I'm sorry I cannot give my name for obvious reasons. I am the Ripper. Warn whores to keep off streets. Old slut next time, I hope." But it was what he didn't say that worried Trevor Lapish.
What disturbed me, and in fact convinced me completely, that if in fact the perpetrator of Yvonne Pearson was the person who'd done all the rest, Yvonne should have been in that letter. She wasn't. And I had grave doubts that in fact the perpetrator of the crimes was the same person who was sending the letter to George Oldfield, and let Mr. Oldfield know my thoughts on the matter.
But George Oldfield had a compelling reason to take the letter from Sunderland seriously. "Up to number 8 now," the letter said. "You say 7, but remember Preston 75. Joan Harrison, murdered in Preston in 1975, 3 weeks after the first Ripper killing. The 26-year-old was found battered to death at these garages. A bite mark on her breast showed a gap in her killer's teeth. The motive looked like sex or robbery, so police had not included it in the Ripper series, till now. Over the next 15 months, police heard 4 times from the man in Sunderland claiming to be the Ripper. No fingerprints, but forensic scientists got a chemical reaction to saliva. He had licked one of the envelopes. Further tests revealed the saliva came from someone with the rare blood group B secretor, shared by only 6% of the population, including the man who left semen in the body of Joan Harrison. The link between the Ripper, the letters from Sunderland, and the Preston murder seemed complete. This forensic evidence helped to convince the police that the letter writer and the Ripper were the same person. But when, much later, Peter Sutcliffe's blood was tested, he had a different blood type, B non-secretor. So someone else wrote those letters, someone else killed Joan Harrison, crimes which have never been solved, crimes which led the police disastrously astray.
We thought the letters were genuine. He had, first of all, mentioned Harrison. He had mentioned a number of murders, and the next one would be an old bag in Manchester, or words to that effect. The next one was.
The Yorkshire Ripper did choose an older victim when he crossed the Pennines again in May 1978. Her name was Vera Millward, and she was the mother of 7 children. The 9th victim was a 41-year-old prostitute, a sick woman with only one lung. She died in the grounds of Manchester Royal Infirmary, where she had once been a patient. The attack was typical: darkness, a deserted space, a hammer to the head, interference with the clothes, stab wounds to the body.
This was not frenzied. This was methodical. The wounds were inflicted in a patterned fashion, and then, and again this emerged increasingly frequently, the instrument was inserted through the same wound. It was being pushed through the skin wound, partially withdrawn, so you had tracks going from the same hole, but in different directions on the inside. There was method all the way through this. Concentration, thought, and care.
The net is closing. I'm anxious that we catch you. before you've time to add another death to the appalling catalogue that you've already got to your credit.
George Oldfield now sent hundreds of police onto the streets, a top-secret operation to track down the Ripper among all the men who went looking for prostitutes. Undercover police tracked 500,000 car movements through 6 northern cities, looking for men who went looking for prostitutes in more than one red light district. Officers used the primitive new Police National Computer, not a database, just a long, long list of car numbers and their owners.
It was spewing out numbers literally by the thousands, and they were in no order other than the time order of appearing in the prostitute areas. So if we wanted to check up and get the information about the movements of one particular vehicle, we had a huge roll, rather like a long 15-inch wide toilet roll, to roll out literally the whole of the way across the Millgarth incident room floor, and people on their hands and knees searching for one particular vehicle. We were utterly amazed, as the figures have shown, with the number of vehicles of men who were punting in prostitute areas. With each one of those, we had a potential divorce. Some men were even taking the wife's car to go and seek prostitutes. And so the wife was the first person we had to see to find out who was driving. When we were briefing the troops who were doing this enquiry, we stressed throughout our favourite phrase was "softly, softly, catch your monkey."
Detectives tried to be tactful as they made house calls to follow up the sightings of cars in the prostitute areas.
Some of the people that we went to see, the male occupants of that house, namely the husband, associated with prostitutes. So we had to be very, very sensitive to that issue, had to be very diplomatic. We would have always preferred to talk to the gentleman of the house away from his wife for obvious reasons. We would say, excuse me, I'm a bit thirsty, do you think you could get me some water? And 9 times out of 10 we'd get a cup of tea, which obviously would take some preparation out of that room in the kitchen. And then we could talk quickly to the husband about his association with prostitutes. But if it was quite apparent that the man was not involved with prostitutes, we used to use different tactics. For example, we used to say to the wife, now's your chance to get rid of your husband if you want. And that was like an icebreaker. The reactions in some houses were different. I'd been thrown out of a house for that in a comic way. In some houses, we know for a fact that it was the husband who was fingered by the wife who wanted to get rid of the husband, not because he was a murderer, but because they were going through a difficult marriage.
Police followed up thousands of sightings, among them a red Ford Corsair, registration number PHE355G. Its owner, Mr. Peter Sutcliffe, of 6 Garden Lane, Heaton, Bradford. Sutcliffe was interviewed for the 3rd time in August 1978. His car had been seen 7 times in the red light areas of Leeds and Bradford. He told the police he was on his way to work, and his wife said they rarely went out at night. That information was duly recorded and filed in the index. The following spring, a building society clerk was walking home from her grandmother's late at night across Savile Park in Halifax. She was the 10th victim. Her name was Josephine Whittaker. She was 19. She'd been bitten by a man with a gap in his teeth. The internal police report made their feelings clear. The dead girl was not a prostitute, nor was her moral character questionable.
There is no difference in the eyes of a senior investigating officer whether she's a prostitute or a completely innocent victim like Josephine. The job is exactly the same, but the feelings are deeper.
The worrying thing now is that he's moved out of the red light areas where he's operated in the past, which makes it now that any woman is at risk.
I was working at Millgarth Street Police Station then, and I spoke to my mother on the phone who lived at Halifax, and she said, hey, a body's been found on the moor in Halifax, a building society girl. So that hit me more because I'd worked at Halifax Building Society prior to joining the police, and when I realised where she had been found, it was considered the best area in Halifax, and the thought that someone walking alone on that moor could be murdered, I just wouldn't have believed it, so it really brought it home to me, just that this man just struck anywhere on anybody.
The murder of Josephine Whittaker meant once again all police leave was cancelled, and morale was high as Detective Superintendent Dick Holland was called back from holiday to take charge.
And there were these approximately 150 officers all assembled waiting for Dick Holland to come and brief us on this new inquiry. Dick Holland came through the door, and I could not believe the rapturous applause and adulation that man got, myself included, as he entered that chamber. It was remarkable. The only thing I can liken it to was like the Roman cavalry returning from defeating the barbarians and the Roman soldiers banging the shields with the swords. It might sound a corny analogy, but that's how I saw it, like a great leader returning to lead his troops.
Any murder inquiry is not pleasant. 10 is 10 times worse. But you just have to keep your nose to the grindstone. You've got to keep the troops at it and try and show the same enthusiasm when you're dealing with number 10 as you had when you first came into number 1.
The killer of Josephine Whittaker left behind some excellent clues. Another set of size 7 boot prints, this time clearly showing the right boot more worn than the left. And forensic scientists identified globules of engineering oil in the blood from some of her 25 stab wounds. A man with size 7 boots and a gap in his teeth. A man with oil on his hands and one boot more worn than the other. An engineer, a factory worker, a lorry driver. No woman in the north of England now went out alone at night if she could avoid it.
When we went across to the car park, yes, we always went 2, 3 of you together. We knew we could be the next victim as easily as anyone else. We knew that we mustn't go anywhere on our own.
That's right. Yeah, I think one of the things we did discuss as well is that it would have been really a feather in his cap if he had managed to get one of us from the incident room.
True, yes.
And that's something we discuss quite often. The fact that we were working in Millgarth, the car park was directly opposite. From an observation point of view, he could have seen straight in, he could have followed any of us to our cars. And we often said, what a feather in his cap if he just happened to get one of us on our own.
And then a final envelope arrived from the letter writer in Sunderland. At Millgarth Police Station in Leeds, Sergeant Megan Winterburn was working in the incident room.
Mr. Oldfield came in and just shouted, "Meg, can you come over here, please?" Now, I went across to the door and said, "I want you in my office now, please." Now, for Mr. Oldfield to say please, I knew there was something a little bit amiss, because he was usually quite a gruff man. And he either didn't use your name at all, or he would just say, "You, now, my office." And he'd actually said please, so I knew something significant had happened. I remember following him into his office, and he had a tape recorder on the desk, and he just said, "I want you to listen to this."
"I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started."
I sat with a manual typewriter in a little room and typed the transcription. It was the most peculiar feeling in that room. It was like you were sick to the pit of your stomach. There was this tape that allegedly has come from the Ripper, and just the thought that it might actually be this man's voice, instead of being elated, it made my stomach churn.
"I reckon your boys are letting you down, George. They can't be much good, can they?"
I had to play it over and over again to be able to write the shorthand and then to transcribe it. But yes, first reaction was, this is a man who knows what's happened. It's the Ripper.
They went public with the tape and letters from Sunderland on the 26th of June 1979. Reporters from all over Britain were there to listen.
"At the rate I'm going, I should be in the book of records. I think it's 11 up to now, isn't it? Well, I'll keep on going for quite a while yet."
Public response was enormous. 50,000 calls.
"I can't see myself being nicked just yet."
We've got over 200 detectives out now following up leads. Obviously, it's far too early to say what's coming from any of them.
I thought he was taunting us. I thought it was a genuine tape from the Ripper taunting us for not having caught him. The actions, in fact, of a psychopath in that he enjoys the chase and enjoys taunting the investigators.
A killer taunting the police, or a hoaxer wasting their time. Desperate for a positive lead and in failing health, George Oldfield got it wrong. For him and Dick Holland, this was the voice of the killer.
Obviously, I'll live with that for the rest of my life. I'll live with being a party to the wrong decision. But if we hadn't gone down and it had been correct, that would have been even worse to live with.
"I warned you in March that I'd strike again."
Well, before, we know we've been looking for a man, and there are literally millions, and we didn't know where he came from. But now that we can localise the area, the field is narrowed appreciably, as I'm sure you must agree.
I always remember the image, seeing him on television, having received the tapes from the man who claimed to be the perpetrator, goading him, and of George hunched over the tape recorder listening to it with Dick Holland at his side. And I thought then, this is getting personal.
"Well, it's been nice chatting to you, George. Yours, Jack the Ripper."
There could be only one victor in this personal battle. Not the detective from Yorkshire, not the voice from Sunderland, but an invisible man, a man with a Bradford accent. Peter Sutcliffe won 18 more months of freedom, and 3 more women died.
And you can see the concluding part on Tuesday at 10 o'clock.